Imagine waking with the hum of machines as your lullaby, the ceiling light bleaching your eyelids every time they dared to flutter open. The weight of tubes and bandages tethered me in place, my body foreign, unfamiliar, as though I had been borrowed from someone else. Pain was everywhere, raw, relentless, but it wasn't what made breathing difficult. It was the silence, the knowledge that something more than bones had been broken. In that silence, memory crept in. A stretch of road glistening with rain, the frantic squeal of tires, a sudden spin, metal folding inward like paper. Then nothing. When awareness returned, the world was sharper, crueler, carrying with it the unbearable truth that life as I knew it was over. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and wilted flowers left too long in a vase. Nurses drifted in and out, kind voices masking pity. I responded with nods, conserving my energy. My voice, when I tried to use it, felt alien, small against the beeping monitors. Days and nights blurred. Yet beneath the haze, something inside me stirred. Not hope, but a simmering heat, a pulse that whispered I had not been destroyed, only changed. It's a strange thing, the way devastation clears a space. My old self, trusting, unguarded, soft, was buried beneath the wreckage. In her place grew a woman who would no longer beg for comfort or lean blindly on others. I didn't yet know what form she would take, only that she had been awakened. Hospitals are designed to keep you alive, not to make you feel alive. Hours stretched like unspooled thread. Every sound was amplified. The shuffle of slippers on linoleum, the distant cry of someone else's grief, the rattle of a food cart delivering meals I could barely swallow. I learned to keep my face still, my eyes half closed, because people revealed their truest selves when they thought you weren't listening. That was how I first sensed the fracture between illusion and reality. Voices drifted close, familiar voices that should have soothed me, but instead carried an edge that made my pulse pound against the monitor's steady rhythm. Their words were low, but not low enough. I stayed motionless, my breathing shallow, as if sleep had claimed me. In that moment, a truth far crueler than any doctor's prognosis settled over me. What had been shattered on the road wasn't only my body or the fragile promise of motherhood. It was the life I had trusted, the love I had believed unshakable. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I let their words carve themselves into me, each one sharpening the outline of the woman I was becoming. Grief was no longer my only companion. Betrayal had entered the room, and with it, the spark of something dangerous, something resolute. My name is Chloe Evans. The woman who had once lived was gone. The one who opened her eyes in that sterile room carried fire in her veins. Before the crash, my life had the polish of a picture frame you'd see on a mantel. Perfectly arranged, carefully lit, easy to admire. Work gave me freedom. As a freelance graphic designer, I could spend mornings sketching at the kitchen table and afternoons meeting clients at coffee shops. My calendar was my own, my income steady, and I was proud of the independence I had built. Mark often told me he admired that about me. He wore charm like a second skin, easy smiles and words that made strangers lean in closer. To anyone watching, he looked like the husband women dream of. Helpful with groceries, quick with a compliment, the kind of man who kissed the back of my hand just because. Our house in Ohio carried the same polished image: a white fence, neat flower beds, a porch swing. It was the kind of place where neighbors waved on summer evenings and dogs barked in backyards. We were expecting our first child, and that expectation colored everything. Baby name lists scattered across the counter, pastel paint samples taped to the nursery wall, tiny socks folded in a drawer waiting for the feet that would fill them. We'd chosen her name, Lily. Just saying it aloud filled the room with warmth. I thought we were both counting the days with the same kind of wonder. Linda, my mother-in-law, orbited our lives with a watchful presence. On the surface, she was polite, supportive even, offering advice on recipes or how to manage pregnancy fatigue. Our relationship wasn't marked by affection, but by what I assumed was respect. She never argued with me, never raised her voice. I mistook her distance for boundaries, believing she was letting me carve my own place in the family. Looking back, it's strange how silence can disguise itself as kindness. The night of the accident refuses to leave me, even though it comes only in fragments. Rain slashing across the windshield. Wipers straining to keep up. The tires slipping when I tried to brake. A blur of headlights spinning toward me. The terrible crunch of metal folding into itself, like a soda can crumpled by an unseen hand. Then nothing. When I woke, time had rearranged itself. The light in the hospital room told me days had passed. My body ached in ways I had no words for, but the emptiness inside me was worse than any fracture. A doctor, voice soft, told me what I already felt in my bones. Lily hadn't survived. I lay still, my hand resting on the space that should have held her safe. The silence after his words was unbearable, louder than the machines, louder than the footsteps in the hall. My daughter, the life I had built for her, the promise of everything we had planned, it was all gone in a single merciless instant. The medication wrapped around me like a heavy fog, muting the edges of pain but sharpening sounds in unexpected ways. Each beep of the monitor, each shuffle of shoes across the floor cut through the haze. I kept my eyes closed, my breathing even, convincing anyone who looked that I was still trapped in the drugged quiet of recovery. The door opened with a soft click. 2 voices entered with it, voices I knew better than my own heartbeat. Mark spoke first, his tone low, practiced. "She's out again." Linda's reply came crisp and unyielding, like glass snapping. "Good. Then listen carefully." I listened too. Their words carried across the sterile air, floating above me like smoke I couldn't escape. Linda's sentences were stripped of softness, every syllable carved to cut. "She's broken now. There's no air, only a bill that will follow you for years. You need to think about yourself. Cut your losses." Silence followed, the kind that weighs down a room. I waited, desperate for him to dismiss her, to defend me, to say something, anything, that could make her cruelty the rambling of a bitter woman. But what came instead hollowed me out completely. Mark's voice, familiar but emptied of warmth, answered with frightening calm. "You're right. The accounts will give me enough to start over. It's what she would have wanted for me." The words fell heavier than the accident itself. I lay still, as if the drugs had truly anchored me beyond movement. But inside, every nerve screamed. My hands itched to tear away the 4 lines, to rise and scream until the walls shook. Instead, I became stone, because stone doesn't break again once it has already shattered. Linda's shoes tapped against the tile, the rhythm careless, almost satisfied. She muttered something about timing, about how no one would blame him for moving on. Mark hummed his agreement, the sound so casual it could have been about groceries. My chest tightened. I wanted to believe I had misheard, that medication had twisted their voices into something monstrous. But clarity cut through the fog. I hadn't imagined it. Their betrayal had been spoken plainly, with no hesitation, no shame. The machines kept their steady rhythm, disguising the storm inside me. I forced my breaths to stay measured, feigned the fragility they expected. To them, I was weak, unconscious, incapable of comprehension. To me, this disguise became my armor. Every word they left hanging in that room etched itself into me, branding a truth I could never unhear. Mark wasn't the man who had kissed the back of my hand in the grocery line. Linda wasn't the respectful mother-in-law I had trusted at my table. Together, they were something else, calculating, ruthless, stripped of the masks they wore in daylight. And as I lay perfectly still, I realized I wasn't just broken. I was awake. When the room finally emptied, the quiet pressed against me like a weight. I forced myself upright, each movement grinding against stitched muscles, my body protesting every inch. The nurse had left me a tablet earlier, something to distract myself with. I hadn't touched it until now. My hands trembled, not from weakness but from urgency. I typed in the familiar login sequence, each keystroke deliberate. The screen loaded slowly, the spinning circle taunting me. My breath caught when the numbers appeared. Zeros. Not the kind that comfort, but the kind that hollow out your chest. Every account sat barren, balances reduced to nothing more than dust. The figure of what had been there rose unbidden in my mind. Years of projects completed at 3 a.m, clients won and lost, invoices carefully chased down. My father's watchful eyes when he left me his savings, my mother's whispered reminder to build something lasting. All of it, erased in a matter of days. I scrolled frantically, searching for answers the way one searches through wreckage after a fire. Line after line of transactions stared back at me, each transfer stamped with the same destination. My throat tightened as if invisible hands had closed around it. The memory surfaced suddenly, vivid in its cruelty. Mark at my bedside, fingers wrapped around mine. His touch had felt gentle then, steadying. I had believed it was love. Now the image warped. The phone resting casually in his other hand. His thumb swiping, positioning. The soft press of my fingertip against the glass. He hadn't been comforting me. He'd been unlocking my life, siphoning it into his own pockets while I drifted between sleep and pain. I pulled the blanket tighter around myself, fighting the nausea clawing at my stomach. Each detail replayed with sickening clarity. The warmth of his palm, the way he whispered reassurances I couldn't quite recall. A performance, perfectly timed to strip me bare while I was defenseless. My chest burned with a mix of disbelief and rage. Not only had they spoken about abandoning me, but he had already acted, already gutted the foundation of everything I had built. Betrayal wasn't abstract anymore. It had a ledger, dates, amounts, proof I could touch with shaking fingers. I saved the records to the tablet's drive, copying every detail, every transaction. The cold blue glow of the screen reflected back a woman I hardly recognized. Eyes wide, jaw set, fury smoldering under exhaustion. For a moment, I let my hand rest on the tablet's edge, grounding myself. The world thought I was weak, broken, too drugged to notice. But I knew now, with bone-deep certainty, what they had taken. And I knew with equal clarity that I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. When Mark and Linda returned later, I folded myself into fragility. My voice cracked, my gaze fell, and every movement was heavy with the weight of loss. I let them see what they expected to see. A woman too broken to rise, too drowned in grief to question. Their pitying glances carried no suspicion. I need to rest, I whispered, sinking further into the pillows. Please leave me for now. Mark adjusted the blanket at my side, his expression soft, almost rehearsed. Linda lingered a beat longer, scanning me as though looking for weakness she had already declared aloud. Then, satisfied, they both stepped out, the door closing behind them with a muted click. The instant their footsteps faded down the hall, the mask fell. My trembling stopped, my eyes sharpened. I reached for the phone by my bed with hands steadier than I expected. Each press of the screen was a lifeline pulling me back into control. The first call went to the bank. I kept my tone measured, careful. My voice carried the authority of someone reporting facts, not accusations. I detailed the unauthorized transfers, listing dates and amounts. When the representative asked if I suspected anyone, I swallowed the name on my tongue. Not yet. Evidence would be my shield, not emotion. I framed the theft as anonymous, letting the words fraudulent activity carry the weight instead of husband. The case was logged, frozen accounts initiated. A start. The second call was harder, not because of doubt, but because it required pulling someone else into the storm. Sarah answered on the second ring, her voice brisk, alive with the energy of a woman who never backed down from a fight. "Chloe," she asked, urgency sharpening her tone. "I need your help," I said. No theatrics, no hesitation. Just truth stripped to its core. I told her enough to make her silence thicken on the line. The betrayal, the missing funds, the need for absolute secrecy. She didn't ask if I was sure. Sarah never wasted breath on doubts once she heard resolve. "What do you need?" she asked simply. "A new phone. A laptop. Something clean, untraceable. Bring them to me. Tonight." Her agreement came swift, decisive. Consider it done. Relief mixed with a steel-edged calm. I ended the call, set the phone down, and allowed myself a single deep breath. The room was the same, machines beeping, curtains swaying in the faint breeze of the vent. But its meaning had shifted. This wasn't a prison anymore. It was a war room. The performance of weakness would continue. Every sigh, every broken glance, every whispered plea for space was now part of my arsenal. Let them believe they had drained me of everything. Let them think I was too shattered to act. Because behind the mask of fragility, I was already building the first stones of my counterattack. The nurse wheeled in a tray of untouched soup just as Sarah slipped through the door. She carried no flowers, no bright distractions, only a nondescript tote bag that she set discreetly at the foot of my bed. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, moved quickly over me, then to the machines, before she leaned close. "No one saw me bring this," she murmured. Inside the bag was the lifeline I'd asked for. A sealed laptop, a phone still in its box, chargers coiled neatly. Tools, nothing more, but in my hands they felt like weapons. I slid the bag under the blanket until the nurse left, and only then did Sarah pull a chair closer. "First rule," she said quietly. "Everything you do from now on is evidence. Don't give them a hint you know what's happened." Her certainty anchored me. Together we set up the laptop, the sterile hospital table transformed into a desk. I logged into my accounts with methodical precision. Screens of numbers filled the display, each transaction like a fresh wound. Sarah leaned over my shoulder, scanning quickly, jotting notes in a small pad she carried. "We secure what's left," she instructed. "Then we track the trail, I followed her lead. Passwords changed. Notifications rerouted to the new phone. Accounts with even the smallest balances moved beyond reach. Each completed step stitched back a fragment of control, piece by piece. The hours blurred, but not in the same way as before. This blur was purposeful. We cataloged documents, printed confirmations, saved files to encrypted drives. For every theft Mark thought invisible, we carved a line of proof. When the work slowed, Sarah leaned back, her gaze cutting into me. You need his words. If he admits anything, we'll have leverage no bank statement can give. The suggestion sat heavy, but I nodded. My voice had to carry innocence, even as I laid a snare. I dialed Mark on the new phone, heart pounding at the first ring. His voice, too warm, too easy, filled my ear. Chloe? How are you feeling? I'm managing, I said, soft enough to sound fragile. Mark, I can't stop worrying. About money, the bills, everything. Do we have enough? His laugh was light, dismissive. Don't stress about that. I'm handling everything. You just focus on getting better. The recording app ticked silently on the screen, capturing every syllable. I pressed further. But are you sure? I thought I saw withdrawals. Chloe, he interrupted, patronizing now. You're in no state to understand finances right now. Trust me. I've got it covered. Sarah's eyes met mine as she tapped the recording button off. Her expression said more than words. We had him. I ended the call with a murmur of thanks, then set the phone down with deliberate care. My body might still have been tethered by 4 lines, but power was already shifting. Each file, each word, each recording became a brick in the case we were building. And Mark, without realizing it, was laying them down for me himself. The day I left the hospital, I didn't walk back into the house I once called mine. Sarah's car carried me past it, the curtains drawn, the driveway empty. The sight of it stirred nothing, no longing, no ache, only resolve. Her guest room became my base, its neutral walls and quiet order a safer cocoon than the place where betrayal still hung in the air. Recovery moved slowly, but planning quickened. Each morning, I watched the phone with patience, waiting for the inevitable reach from Mark. His messages dripped with feigned devotion. Questions about my rest, reminders that he was taking care of everything. I responded sparingly, short and tired-sounding, enough to maintain the illusion. He had to believe I was still fragile, still blind. Sarah urged restraint. Let him think he's untouchable. The moment he grows overconfident, that's when he'll slip. So I waited. Days stacked quietly, one upon the other, until a week had passed. That's when I set the snare. The text was carefully written, every word designed to stroke his ego and sharpen his greed. Mark, I remember you holding my hand. Thank you for being my rock. I'm signing the paperwork for the life insurance payout for Lily tomorrow. I want you to have it all. My thumb hovered before pressing send. Once it left the screen, silence filled the room. Minutes later, his reply arrived, syrupy, overflowing with affection, every sentence reeking of false comfort. The bait had landed. That evening, Sarah and I sat together at her kitchen table, the glow of the phone lighting up between us. Mark's texts continued, each one edging closer to questions about timing, amounts, details. He couldn't help himself. Greed doesn't sit still. Linda surfaced soon after. Her number appeared in group threads, her language more direct, almost commanding. She wrote about debts to be cleared, vacations they could finally take, investments to set Mark up properly. Reading her words was like watching wolves tear into something they believed already dead. I played my role flawlessly. My responses were scattered, tinged with sorrow, crafted to sound like someone drifting in and out of clarity. I apologized for being slow to answer, claimed exhaustion, thanked them both for standing by me. Every message deepened their certainty that I was too broken to see through them. What they didn't realize was that each word they sent added to the growing file Sarah kept, screenshots, timestamps, threads preserved in order. Together, we were weaving a net, and they were stepping willingly into its center. By the end of the week, their plans had become bold. Linda spoke of furniture upgrades. Mark hinted at cars he'd been eyeing. They were already spending money that didn't exist, drunk on the fantasy of wealth stolen from my loss. I set my phone face down on the table, pulse steady. The trap was no longer waiting to be sprung. It was already tightening around them, link by link. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Its white siding, once a comfort, now felt sterile and false. I stood at the threshold, my hand brushing the key I no longer needed, but carried anyway. Behind me, Sarah's car idled 2 houses down, the private investigator waiting with her, both out of sight. My chest rose with a steady breath before I stepped inside. Mark greeted me with a smile that faltered when he saw how steady I walked. He quickly rearranged his expression into concern, ushering me in with a hand at my back. "You sure you're up for this? You don't look." "I just came to gather some things." I cut in, keeping my voice soft, controlled. My eyes scanned the room, the furniture, the framed photos that mocked the life I thought I had. He followed me into the living room, his voice laced with practiced warmth. "You don't need to worry about anything. I've got it all covered." I lowered myself onto the couch and set my bag beside me. The weight of the device inside, the one Sarah had prepared, grounded me. I reached in, pressed the button, and let the small red light glow unseen. "Mark," I said, tilting my head as though searching for reassurance. "Do you remember the hospital?" He stiffened just slightly before shrugging. "Of course. I never left your side." My fingers brushed over my phone, pulling up the recording. The air in the room thickened when I pressed play. Linda's voice filled the space first, cutting and merciless. His followed, agreeing, calculating. The sound of their betrayal echoed off the walls that had once sheltered us. Mark froze, then leaned back against the arm of the chair, his face shifting. The performance dropped. A slow smirk crept across his mouth, confidence replacing pretense. "You weren't supposed to hear that," he said, almost amused. "But maybe it's better this way. You think all I did for you came free? That money wasn't stolen. It was a fee. For putting up with your endless grief. For staying while you drowned us both." The words landed sharp, but I didn't flinch. I only watched as the man I'd once trusted laid himself bare. The front door opened. Linda entered, carrying a shopping bag. She stopped when she saw me, then her expression hardened. "So, you know." Mark didn't move to stop her when she joined him. In fact, they exchanged a look, almost triumphant. "She was always too naive," Linda said, setting the bag on the table. "Better she hears it now." Their gloating filled the room, piling higher with every sentence, every sneer. I stayed still, letting them believe I was powerless, my silence nothing more than shock. But the device in my bag was still recording, every venomous word preserved. They thought they were confessing to a broken woman. In truth, they were signing their own undoing. For the first time since the accident, I felt my lips curve, not in bitterness, not in pain, but in something cold and certain. A smile. Mark's smirk faltered, his confidence flickering as he registered it. "You really think this is clever?" he said, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. "You can't prove anything." I tilted my head, letting the silence stretch until it pressed against him. "That's the difference between you and me, Mark. You think words vanish after they're spoken. I collect them, record them, keep them." Linda scoffed, her laugh sharp. "She's bluffing." "Am I?" I pulled the tablet from my bag, tapping the screen. A neat row of files appeared, transactions, statements, audio logs, each labeled with dates and times. I turned the screen so they could see. Every transfer, every fingerprint entry, every vile sentence you let slip in that hospital room. It's all preserved. Duplicated. Sent to my lawyer. Sent to the police. The color drained from Linda's face, but Mark barked a laugh, though it sounded thinner now. "Even if you did, no one's going to take the word of some grieving woman over mine." That was when the knock came. Firm, deliberate. The sound of inevitability. Mark straightened, his bravado cracking. The door swung open, and two uniformed officers stepped inside, their presence filling the room with authority. The taller one spoke first, his voice calm, official. "Mark Evans." Mark's reply stuttered. "What's this? What are you doing here?" "You're under arrest for grand larceny, fraud, and exploitation of a vulnerable adult," the officer recited, stepping forward. He turned Mark around, the snap of metal cuffs echoing in the living room. Mark's protests spilled out in a rush, words tripping over themselves. "This is a mistake. She's lying. You don't understand." Linda lunged forward, her voice shrill. "You can't just take him like this. We're family. She's manipulating you." The second officer caught her by the arm, steady but unyielding. "Linda Carter, you're under arrest as an accomplice. You have the right to remain silent." Her tirade sputtered into a stunned silence as the rights were read aloud. The sound filled the house like a bell tolling, final and absolute. I didn't rise. I didn't shout. I simply sat, watching the two people who had carved me open with their cruelty now dragged into the light they had tried to hide from. Mark twisted to look at me as he was led toward the door. His eyes searched for weakness, for the old Chloe who would flinch. But all he found was the same steady smile. The officers guided them out, their voices fading down the hallway. The front door closed behind them, sealing the moment. I exhaled slowly, the air leaving me like smoke after a long-burning fire. The trap had sprung, not with fury, but with precision. They had believed I was powerless. They had mistaken silence for surrender. And now, the only thing left to them was the echo of their own undoing. Months later, the courtroom drama ended not with a dramatic trial, but with signatures on a plea agreement. Mark and Linda, once so bold, sat pale and subdued as the charges were read aloud and their own attorneys pushed them toward acceptance. Felony convictions, repayment orders, damages. Each line in the agreement cut away at the empire of arrogance they had built. They had no more smiles, no more smirks. Just silence. I left that courthouse lighter. Justice hadn't erased what I lost, but it carved space for something new. The money returned to me felt different now. Not a savings account, not security, but possibility. It wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to the memory of the little girl who never took her first breath. The foundation began quietly. A rented office, a handful of dedicated volunteers, letters sent to hospitals. We named it after Lily, her name written in soft script across every piece of stationery, every pamphlet. The mission was simple: to help mothers who walked the same unbearable path I had, to ensure they did not walk it alone. Funds covered counseling, medical bills, support groups. Slowly, the work spread. Each mother who found relief through it became part of Lily's legacy, her presence reaching into lives she never had the chance to touch. People asked me often why I chose this instead of simply rebuilding privately. My answer never wavered. Money, when stolen, becomes poisoned if kept only as restitution. But when turned outward, when used to heal, it becomes something impossible to steal again. Standing at the opening event for the foundation, I looked at the framed photo of a flower we had chosen to represent Lily. It wasn't a gravestone, not an end, but a beginning. That was when I realized revenge had never been the destination. The arrests, the convictions, they were steps. Necessary, but not the heart of my journey. What mattered was standing tall in the place they had tried to level, holding on to a future they believed they had taken from me. They thought grief had broken me. They mistook silence for surrender. But fire does not destroy, it reshapes. And I had been forged into someone they could never have imagined. This wasn't about them anymore. It was about her. Always her. Do you think I made the right choice by fighting back and taking revenge? Or should I have given Mark and Linda another chance? I really want to know what you think, so share your opinion in the comments below. And if you want to hear more stories like mine, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next one.